Hello, this is Jadon Sancho. You're listening to Yellowwallpod.
Taken short, Sancho! The talismanic teenager rescues Dortmund. In by Piszczek. Oh, and in! Hakimi! The hero for Dortmund! And Dortmund are away. It's Jadon Sancho. He's got Alcácer with him. It's Jadon Sancho, Alcácer! Dortmund's penalty box predator shows his quality again.
Hello and welcome to episode 288 of the Yellowwallpod. I'm your host Stefan Butzko, and this week we will talk about Borussia Dortmund's 3-1 win away to Köln, the UEFA Champions League draw, and Saturday's match against Union Berlin. To discuss all that and more, join me once again, Lars Pollmann. Hello, Lars. Good to have you here. How are you doing?
Hello, Stefan. You don't have me there, wherever you are, but I'm doing fine.
Well, here on the show. Also here on the show is Matthias Zug. Hello, Matthias. How are you doing?
Hello, Stefan. I'm doing quite well. How are you?
It's also very pleasant here today in Philadelphia, hence I'm doing very fine. And I can announce the return of a special guest. He blogs about Union Berlin, or at least used to, because I've checked the site out and it's not been updated since May. But it's eiserneketten.de. Welcome to the show, Daniel Roßbach.
Yeah, hi. The reason that that site isn't updated is that we decided to do some consolidation of efforts, and we now moved all the tactics blogging also to Textilvergehen.de.
Yes, that is amazing. Textilvergehen is obviously one of the biggest German blogs, and they cover Union Berlin for the first time ever in the Bundesliga. So, Daniel, I'm very glad to have you on here. Yeah, before we get to the Champions League draw, I gladly announce that this episode is sponsored by Dennis Thompson from San Diego, and he would enjoy connecting with any other Dortmund fans down there for a game sometime. You can follow him on Twitter at Danny Thompson Jr. And also we're sponsored for this episode by Daniel Besel from the Bay Area in California. How far is that to San Diego, Matthias?
Oh, quite a few hours.
All right. So,
but a very pleasant few hours of driving at least.
So yeah, if you also want to be a sponsor like Daniel or Dennis, then go to patreon.com/theyellowwall for more information. Also, big thanks to everyone who is already subscribing. We breached the $300 mark today. We have put our written content, which includes interviews, features, and news behind the paywall, as some of you have already noticed, to make all the reporting feasible, financially feasible for me. So it's just $1 a month. So go and subscribe. And the $500 mark is next. I hope so. And a shout out to Rip City in our Yellowwallpod.com Bundesliga Fantasy League. Only 32 match days to go until you get the candlelight dinner with Lars Pollmann. If you can manage to stick to the top, my FC automatism have dropped from 48th to 84th. So, yeah, I have to worry more about finishing last. And the punishment, as we all know, is a candlelight dinner with Konstantin Eckner. So, with all the housekeeping out of the way, today, Thursday, was the UEFA Champions League draw, and Borussia Dortmund are in Group F along with Barcelona, Inter Milan and Slavia Prague. Your top line reaction, Lars?
First of all, Stefan, as you were talking about housekeeping, how are I can see rather that your geography skills are still lacking, because you don't even get things right in the country where you live right now. So, I mean, that's disappointing. My first reactions to the draw, I was working during the draw and I wouldn't have watched it anyway, just because, I don't need to see names plop out of, mini footballs, so to say. But obviously for me, the headliner, as, Twitter followers will know, I am a Inter Milan fan. So playing against them on a personal level sucks, just because I would have liked for them to be on the other side of the draw so I can watch the games, which I guess is now only possible if the UEFA were to schedule the games across from each other, if you like. So that's kind of disappointing for me personally, and also presumably one of those two teams not making it out of the group stage is a bit disappointing, but as a general football fan and, someone who reports on Dortmund specifically, I think this is close to the perfect draw you can get. Finally, no Atletico, no Real Madrid, no Man City. Thank God Arsenal are bad now, so they aren't in the mix. Finally, some change from pot one, if you like. With Barca, I think we've kind of waited for that draw for the last few years, I would say. So it's nice, especially with this still being in the heyday of Lionel Messi. It would have been really disappointing if Dortmund and Barca were to meet in, let's say, 2023 or so, when Messi just hung up his boots or whatever. So I think arguably the best team from pot one from a Dortmund perspective. Inter is obviously a very attractive draw, even if on a personal note, I don't like it very much, but it's a great city, great stadium, a huge club, but still one that Dortmund, I think, will be favorites against, even though Antonio Conte is a magician as a head coach and will have them much better than they've been over the last few years. And then I think pot four teams, seeing as Leipzig weren't available for Dortmund, neither one of those put too much fear in the hearts of Dortmund fans, I think. And with Prague, you have a very cool city for away fans, for traveling fans, and a short trip for the team, and presumably somewhere between 4 and 6 points. So that's all you hope for from pot four. So ultimately, 3 attractive draws from a number of perspectives, and a big sporting challenge, but I think Dortmund will be up for the test.
Yeah, Matthias, it's the first time Lionel Messi will play at the Westfalenstadion. I personally are quite disappointed that it happens the year I definitely cannot be there for the game. How confident are you that Dortmund will make it out of the group?
Oh, that's hard to say how confident. Barcelona and Conte's Inter, obviously very, very difficult opposition. I would say, personally, they probably have as good a chance as any of them, of any of the 3 to go through. Confidence-wise, I don't know. I wouldn't be shocked if they make it through. I wouldn't be shocked if they finish 3rd. So I guess 50-50, for lack of anything better. I think any of those 3 can go through, and any of those 3 obviously can and will finish 3rd.
Yeah, Daniel, what's your reaction to the Champions League draw overall?
Well, as a neutral, I was also looking forward to Barcelona playing Dortmund finally. But actually, that game, even though Messi is still playing, as you said, is coming a few years too late. Would have been really awesome to see hyper-pressing Dortmund play against actual Barcelona a few years ago. But that will remain a sort of a regret or a missed opportunity of the football gods. And now that I actually wouldn't be too skeptical about Dortmund's chances, because if you look back to over the last few years, Barca are quite likely to let a few points slip here and there, which doesn't necessarily mean that they won't go through, but I think it is an opportunity for a side like Dortmund to pick up a few points. And it's not necessarily a 12-9-6-0 points group.
Yeah, I would agree. It's definitely a very interesting group, and I'm very much looking forward to it. Borussia Dortmund today was also honored for the Equal Game Award for the club's efforts to fight racism. Borussia Dortmund's campaign is called Borussia Verbindet, and is basically a concerted effort to fight against racism, right-wing mindsets, anti-Semitism, and all that. I know they fund educational trips to the extermination camp to Auschwitz, and fund various other projects that basically follow the same efforts. And I think this whole campaign started in 2013 when the fan stewards, let's call them that, Jens Volker and Thilo Danielsmeyer back then, were attacked by right-wing extremists on a trip to Shakhtar Donetsk. And it wasn't the first effort by Dortmund to fight fascism and right-wing extremism, but this is certainly more concerted now. And obviously, living in Dortmund, or have lived in Dortmund, I can say it's also very much needed. Everyone who lives there definitely knows the suburb Dortmund Dorsfeld, which is in the entire Ruhr area a bit of a Nazi hub. So there needs to be much more work to be done, and it's nice that UEFA appreciates that. I will not further comment on UEFA's efforts to combat racism overall, because that will be a very long and disappointing show. So just nice for Dortmund to get that honor. I think it was the first or second time this award was given out. So Hans-Joachim Watzke received the award today, and that's all about the Champions League and the draw in Monaco today. So we can now move over to the match in Köln on Friday night. Borussia Dortmund with a very late 3-1 win to maintain number 1 spot in the Bundesliga. But I think we really have to talk a little bit here about the first half, which was, as we say in German, grottenschlecht by Borussia Dortmund. Lars, where do we begin?
I was going to channel Gennaro Gattuso and say the game was sometimes good, sometimes shit. I mean, the first 60 minutes, I would say, not only the first half.
Yes.
I don't understand really what the thought process ahead of the game was. I mean, last season, Dortmund dropped points away from home to eventual relegated teams such as Hannover and Nuremberg, which were 2 goalless draws, which you could argue from a mathematical standpoint kind of cost Dortmund the title, even though it's obviously a Milchmädchenrechnung, as we say in Germany, to make that argument, just because you can't cherry pick where Dortmund's drop points hurt the most. I mean, they dropped them no matter where. So for me, I kind of expected them to learn from that harrowing experience of last season and go into these games with a smarter approach, an approach that might be conducive to actually winning the game from the outset and not having to wrestle it from Cologne's hands in the final third. But I guess I made my plans without one Lucien Favre and his conservative mind, and also obviously the team itself, because no matter how the coach sets you up, you are still allowed to make adjustments yourself and play better, which, just didn't really happen in comparison to the games I mentioned earlier. So, they kind of let Cologne do their thing instead of imposing themselves, which, is surprising considering how strong Dortmund looked for most part, at least against Augsburg, and how positive their start of the season has been, and how positive the atmosphere around the club in general is at the moment. So I'm not really sure just what the, as I said, thought process before the game was, and how they envisioned the game against Cologne to go in their favor with the setup they used at the start of the game. So, I mean, for all the credit that I think we will give Lucien Favre in a minute for his in-game coaching this time around, I think there need to be some questions asked as to what exactly the plan was going into the game.
Yeah, I guess I have one quick follow-up question for you, Lars. Are you triggered by the word patience?
No.
Okay, because Dortmund players after the game and Favre, they always underscore how much patience they need in their build-up and whatnot. And
that kind of annoys me in that context, because they didn't win because of patience. They won because they completely changed what they did roughly halfway through the second half, because nothing worked. I mean, it's not a patient approach that paid off eventually, as everybody predicted at the start of the game. It was the complete upheaval of the approach that got them the result. And ultimately, I would say we could point to 2 individual players who got them the result, and that is the 2 Favre brought on in Brandt and Hakimi.
Yeah, we can add Sancho to that. Daniel, I'll go to you next because I think you have sympathies for Dortmund. I'm sure that you consider Cologne as one of your main rivals for, life for another year in the Bundesliga. So, where do you think things went wrong for Dortmund in the first half?
I think that not having the solutions that Brandt brought on was quite key. But also I have to say that
you just reverse engineered an answer basically.
Yeah. And also I have limited expertise about regarding the first half because I was watching the Dortmund against Augsburg game that day because I was preparing for Union playing Augsburg, so that was a bit of a distraction. And so I don't actually have too much to add to the details of that game.
All right, that is completely fine. Matthias, then I'll come to you finally. Why does Dortmund still isn't able to deal with the high press that Cologne applied for a long time?
Good question. I'm not in the coaching circles and so on. I think, obviously you saw when there was a change in formation and change in personnel, it worked much, much better. I think that's honestly not a Dortmund issue. I don't think so at all. I think that's any club issue. I mean, it's like Bayern. If you stand on their toes, they have a really hard time. If you make it very uncomfortable for the opposition to play their game, it's going to take them a long time to figure out a way around it. Because it's not like Köln made it hard on Dortmund and then kind of coupled that with amazing attacking feats. Yeah, they had a few chances, of course, but their main goal was to not allow Dortmund into the game rather than necessarily imposing an overwhelming game plan themselves. So it took a while. It took a few adjustments, but that's sports. That's football. I don't see this as an issue, to be honest.
Well, maybe you're right, Matthias, and I should maybe not blow this up too much because it's still very early in the season and Dortmund have, of course, a lot of room for improvement at this point. But at the same time, I would also say that the 2 points of criticism I have are not exactly new and is something that I hoped for was going to be fixed over the summer. And if you want to read about it, the 2 points of criticisms were addressed by me in the Adventures of Textilvergehen Part 2 on the Yellowwallpod page. But nevertheless, I'm going to reiterate it right now. And the first one goes to Dortmund's build-up from the first line, if you want. Hummels, Schulz, Piszczek, Akanji, the first line. And in front of that is, of course, the second line in Weigl and Witzel. And those two are very close together. And I think Konstantin Eckner talked about this on the Rasenfunk, where he was invited, that Cologne have a habit of stretching the opponent when the opponent has the ball. And basically, I think he said, making the field very long. And Dortmund, on the flip side, also have the habit of stretching out quite a bit when they build up. That means Dortmund's first and second line stays back almost, pinned down to their own box. And then the rest, the front four, that just chills beyond the halfway line. And that means there's huge gap and makes this passing channels very long and very easy to intercept. And the problem is when you play against an opponent like Cologne, who presses very high, then if you lose the ball in that build up and play a very risky pass and Köln win it on a turnover, then they can just pass it to one of their many attackers and easily outnumber Dortmund, or at least gain parity. And that's a big problem for Dortmund. So what happened here is that Dortmund's backline was pushed very, very far back, and Modeste and Cordoba basically tried to distort that, and then Cologne pushed up their two central midfielders to cover Witzel and Weigl and take those two out of the game. So what happened is that Dortmund often passed to their fullbacks, to Scholz or Piszczek, but these two were isolated and really didn't have any way to pass the ball forward. So that means Dortmund had to reshuffle the ball. And that is actually one of Lucien Favre's plans. He wants to shuffle the ball back, right, switch it until you move the opponent's chains to the extent that a gap opens, so you can progress the ball. This is what Favre usually means when he talks about patience. But against Cologne, it didn't really work. And when it worked, we come to the second and probably more pressing issue for Dortmund, and that is just the lack of attitude. I mean, come on. If you want to win a championship, then you just cannot stand around and wait for stuff to happen. I mean, Michael Zorc, the sporting director, on the pre-match conference talked about the proverbial edge, and he was trying to warn the team not to slack off, and it's exactly what they did. Yet again, we've seen it a million times past season, and if you make great announcements and have ambitions, you just cannot allow yourself, even though obviously it's a hostile atmosphere in Cologne. We're very much motivated, but you can't allow yourself to just be completely static. So the problem was whenever Dortmund got the ball in the opposition half, they just could not retain it or create anything with it because there was no movement up front. The front four, and I'm also looking at you, Marco Reus, was not moving to the extent to create actual gaps and channels and also dominance. So Dortmund failed to impose themselves, and then the ball just pings back and forth and allows Köln, for example, to create a set piece to go up front. So this is maybe even the bigger criticism than the first point, is that Lucien Favre just currently fails to motivate this team to an extent where they are so motivated and just play the football they're supposed to play right from the get-go, and then we don't have to really talk about how Dortmund are the comeback kings or turn things around, because they just impose themselves from the first minute. So this is something in the future I want to see, that players in midfield have this sharpness and pass the ball around, and not just, take 1, 2, 3, 4 touches, walk around with the ball. Meanwhile, everyone else, their teammates, are not really, participating, especially the guys up front. And, credit to Cologne, they were also very smart about it. Anthony Modeste, when Dortmund were in possession, marked Hummels out of the game, so he wouldn't just receive the ball and then pass it like Mats Hummels does. And John Cordoba was basically a pendulum, having a very close eye on Julian Weigl and trying to disturb him every time he had the ball. So Dortmund's, passing rhythm was completely disrupted by Cologne. And yeah, credit to them. So yeah, end of rant. I was not very happy with seeing that. And but let's not just talk about the bad stuff. I think that rant was long enough. Lars, I think you were quite giddy to see how Julian Brandt then eventually turned this game around, and maybe you can replicate that giddiness right now for us.
Yes, me and my trademark giddiness on this podcast.
Yes.
A winning combination, if there ever was one. I mean, obviously I can't, because it was, heat of the moment stuff, but I think we've established over a number of episodes during the summer and even late last season, when the rumors about Brandt joining Dortmund really heated up, how he would improve the team tremendously, even if perhaps he wouldn't have, the gaudiest numbers himself, because of his football IQ, his intelligence, his innate sense of time and space on the pitch, his movement skills, his technical abilities. I mean, he basically proved us all fairly right in this game, because he completely changed the complexion of a game in, I think, 28 minutes of regular time, without getting on the score sheet himself or directly assisting one of the goals. He was involved in the lead up to 2 goals, I think. But, he didn't have that key moment where everybody could see, if you only watch the highlights, you probably think Julian Brandt didn't have much of an impact on the game, because he didn't play that final ball before the second or third goals. But, he completely changed the way Dortmund played and that way the team, I think, thought about playing forward. Obviously Favre went against his nature as a coach, I would say, in bringing on Brandt as part of what we call a Doppelzehn in Germany. So he played with 2 number 10s in Brandt and Reus ahead of Axel Witsel as the lone, I wouldn't say holding midfielder, because Cologne didn't add anything offensively at that point, so there was nothing to hold. So I would say he was the central midfielder. So Dortmund made perfect use of Brandt's talents in that regard. He had all the space and the liberty to find the little nooks and crannies in Cologne's spacing, which was deteriorating because of their waning running power. I think Cologne probably gave a little too much in the first 60 minutes, so that definitely played a part. But I mean, the way Brandt sees things ahead of everyone else, the way he glides over the pitch effortlessly. I mean, you could go on and on about what makes him such a great player and almost a unique player in Germany or in the Bundesliga, I would say. I don't really know how many players of his caliber there are that are just so instinctive and just know what to do and when to do it on this higher level. I think there are really a few only, and to think that Dortmund got one of them for 25 million when that's the going rate for, second-rate strikers in other leagues, that's still kind of unbelievable to me. And certainly, if Dortmund are going to have any kind of, a real success in terms of a trophy or silverware this season, I think Julian Brandt will have played a major role in that, even if, as I said before, the score sheets or the lists of goal scorers and the like will probably not feature his name too prominently.
Yeah, you mentioned him gliding around the pitch there and asked for comparisons. I think really Reus is the only other player that I can remember who has this style of movement, but if that's not blasphemy, Brandt maybe even has some things that Reus doesn't have in terms of solutions in really tight spaces, and that was really what was striking against Cologne. He just had some really Iniesta-esque turns that create space really well and have a progressive edge to them. Edge is also something that you mentioned already. I found that really impressive.
Yeah, if I may add one tiny tidbit to the transfer fee, because I only realized that yesterday when I looked it up, because Hans-Joachim Watzke said that with the new signings only Mats Hummels has major Champions League experience, but when I looked it up, I saw that Julian Brandt also has already, I think, 21 Champions League games to his name at 23 years of age. So I think that's, valuable European experience just adds to the value of a player. And, it's just more cause and reason for joy about the signature of Julian Brandt for the, negligible fee of 25 million. Matthias, but Julian Brandt, of course, didn't just turn it around by himself. And we saw, I think Lars called it a Doppelzehn, but there were, I would say that also Jadon Sancho was quite central in the last 20 to 24 minutes of the game. How did you see that triangle of skill work out?
Well, obviously it worked out very, very well. With Brandt coming on, all of a sudden there was significantly more movement, which created space for everybody else to start shining as well. It wasn't just a matter of get Reus the ball, get Sancho the ball, and see what they can do. It was significantly improved team play. The dynamic of everyone's movement got better simply because there was more space. Because Köln were forced to get out of their very disciplined shape, and so that allowed others to shine. And I think that's that creative spark that you could see when you have a true playmaker come centrally versus the more static Witsel-Weigl combo in that sense.
Yeah, were you happy that Dortmund equalized on a set piece after conceding from yet another one?
Yeah, and as far as, conceding on a set piece, I've been from, obviously we only have really a couple of matches to go by. Dortmund's overall strength at corners, at defending corners, looks significantly better than it was last season. More strength. The clearances are more determined, let's put it that way. I'm not nervous. Occasionally you'll concede from a corner, and that happened. It was a pretty good corner routine overall. And, I don't compare this to the epidemic of corners conceded last season. We'll kind of see how the rest of the season plays out before I think we can really make a judgment there.
Yeah, I mean, that remains to be seen, because I don't think that Dortmund really changed their zonal marking in the box too much, and putting Lukas Piszczek on the first post is something that could make them vulnerable in exactly the way you saw against Cologne.
Yeah, but you forget one key component. They've added Mats Hummels, who's extremely good at both attacking and defending set pieces. That makes a world of difference. I mean, I think about the number of corners last season where whoever Akanji was paired with screwed up. I don't really foresee that happening much. Yeah, there's still some vulnerabilities to the zonal marking scheme, but there's also vulnerabilities to the straight up man marking system. I think having Mats Hummels in there makes a huge difference both in attacking and defending set pieces.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Lars, do you have a comment to Dortmund set piece defending? Do you think this was just a quote unquote blip, or do you think there is further cause for worry?
I mean, I would say the goal was indefensible, because the goal scorer, Dominik Drexler, is from my hometown, Bonn. Actually, there is a slight chance that I played against him as like a 12-year-old, because he played at a smaller local club until I think 13 years of age. So there's a slight chance I played against him, and obviously he would have learned from me how to steal yourself away at the second post. That
of
was
course.
also my signature move as a 12-year-old fat guy. Obviously, I mean, the losing the header at the first post or towards the first post, that can happen. I mean, that, as Matthias said, you will concede some goals from set pieces. I mean, that's the nature of the game. The problem here was not, losing the headed duel. It was Nico Schulz just falling asleep at the wheel and forgetting about his responsibility at the second post. So, I mean, that will also happen eventually, but in this case, it was extremely preventable, as was, I think, if I'm not mistaken, the corner in itself. So, on a more general note, I would concur with Matthias that the inclusion of Mats Hummels has made a tremendous amount of difference, just because he's so good in the air, but also because he's so calm. And I think that has already had some effect on his teammates, but it's still not going to be a massive strong suit for a team that severely lacks the athletic qualities you need to defend set pieces sometimes, especially against really good teams, or the teams that will come with like two strikers like Cologne did. I mean, there's going to be a numerical disadvantage with players who are big and tall in many games Dortmund play. So that's something, they probably have to just take into account and at times just have to score a goal more. I think Dortmund are well equipped to do that against most opponents this season. So I don't think sad pieces, as we like to call them here, are going to make or break this campaign for Dortmund.
I mean, it's also a trade-off you just have to take as Borussia Dortmund. I think they've beefed up their squad in comparison to the last 2 or 3 seasons, maybe. But also they need to sacrifice, complete athleticism, physicality to, their attacking talent, obviously. And other teams will have different features. So that's just how it is. And so sad pieces, I think, will remain a thing that we will mention once or twice, but hopefully not as often as last season, where I think the overall percentage of goals Dortmund conceded from set pieces, including throw-ins and penalties, was like 44%. So, I don't know. Right now it's at 50% because it's just one of the 2 goals that Dortmund conceded. And both of the shots on target that Dortmund conceded were also in the net. So it might have been smarter to just play with 11 outfield players. But you can never know that before. So yeah. Anything else that needs to be said about the Cologne match?
I would add one thing to something you asked earlier, which is that I don't really expect Köln to be a club that is really fighting relegation very closely. I think they have the quality to end up as a sort of decent lower mid-table side. So
I would agree.
I think, yeah.
But you never know. It's Köln. So
that is true.
The problem with Köln is they have a really bad start. I mean, they already have 0 of 6 points, and they now face Freiburg, which is their boogie team, and they also have, I think, Gladbach and Bayern within their first 6 or so fixtures. So I think it's fairly likely that they're going to be like 17th or 18th after 5 or 6 match days, which, you know, in Cologne is usually a big problem. But I think if they stay calm, which is a big if in Cologne, I would absolutely agree. They have the quality to at least, I would say, do what Düsseldorf did last year, and that was come in 10th and not really have any issue. And remember that Düsseldorf also were in the thick of the relegation battle until they beat Dortmund basically in December. So I think if you look at
2 other teams in the same week,
if you look at the quality of Cologne, that doesn't look like a side that is going to be relegated. And I also think fairly highly of Achim Bayerlotzer, so it's not a situation like, you know, Stuttgart last season, for example, where, you know, a team that was certainly good enough for the Bundesliga that just didn't put it together at really any point of the campaign.
Yeah, who had Stuttgart at their helm again? Was it Taifun Korkut?
Korkut, Weinziel, and the under-19 coach.
Nico Willig was his name.
Right. And he was the only one who did a half-decent job, so.
Yeah, I mean, not a good omen for Cologne, though, because they had the mass at the Kölner Dom, and with that, they obviously had God on their side, and Hennes the Ninth was introduced as the new live mascot, and that was the first L for him, so also not a good omen for the little goat. So we'll see about Cologne, but it's not a perfect start for the Billy Goats. Anywho, I think that concludes our talk about Matchday 2, and we can now move on to Matchday 3, where Dortmund face Union Berlin in the Topspiel, the 6:30 kickoff. Union Berlin started the Bundesliga with a 4-0 loss against RB Leipzig, and then got a very important 1-1 draw away to FC Augsburg after trailing on Matchday 2. But Daniel, before we talk about the Neven Subotics and Urs Fischers and whatnot, I want to talk a little bit about the opening match day still. You had...
Do we have to?
Yeah, I think so. I mean...
I think I'll boycott my voice for that segment.
There was a boycott of atmosphere for the first 15 minutes. But I think it was not cool by the DFL to hand you exactly that fixture for the very first Bundesliga match. But nevertheless, there was a very nice campaign called, I think, Mit dabei. I didn't double check, but I think
Endlich dabei.
Endlich dabei.
So finally with us.
Yes, and I would like you to elaborate a little bit on that very beautiful thing.
Yeah, the idea was that it was over 11,000 days, 11,033 to be precise, since Union had last played a top division game of football back in old Eastern German top division, because obviously Union never played in the Bundesliga before. So there was a long time of waiting and a lot of suffering in between all those years. And obviously a lot of Union people would have liked to see that day and didn't get to, because they didn't live to see that day where Union finally played in the Bundesliga, and sort of honor them and recognize the way that Union has come to get to that point. There was this campaign called Endlich dabei, where people could print out the quantified of people who have died and put them on placards to hold up or use as Doppelhalter, holding them up by 2 sticks, to sort of put them into attendance of that game, even though they couldn't actually be there. And that was a very, very moving thing, as you can imagine, in the first in the minutes leading up to the game.
It was even moving for me, and I'm not emotionally invested into Union Berlin.
Yeah. I'm a relatively recent convert to Union. I don't have a family history there, so it wasn't like having a father that I went to Union with, for example, who would be in that group. But just being part of a club, obviously, you know a lot of people who do sadly die. Like one person who means a lot to a lot of Unioners, for example, is a guy called Tino Czerwinski, who has been a very active fan, who was on the board of the club even in the very chaotic 90s, where Union the club itself was close to death a few times. And he was one of the people who were held up there and were honored. He died I think about a year ago, if I remember correctly. So yeah, that was a really a nice gesture, and it was also a nice gesture of the club to count those about 450 people who were there in that way, to count them in the attendance of the match.
Yeah, that was a very nice gesture. I have to say. So well done, Union Berlin. But I think in Germany they are actually quite famous for I would say that their fan culture. That's fair to say, and a lot of people that I've talked to are very glad to see them finally in the first division, and a lot of people from Dortmund are also very keen on traveling to Union Berlin, to the Alte Försterei. That stadium also has a bit of a history for our let's say new international listeners. Can you fill in the gaps a little bit?
So the really distinguishing mark is that it is the by far the most standing spaces stadium in Germany, and
percentage-wise, I guess.
Yeah, and when finally Berlin gets a shit together, building-wise, and which I guess is a big if, and can sort out the traffic plans, and Union can finally get permission to build the extension of the stadium that is planned and was meant to be ready already. Now it was postponed to actually constructed because you wouldn't want to play in the Bundesliga and on a construction site, and also because the sort of permission scheme is running a bit late. But if that is completed and goes from 22,000 capacity to 37,000, then it will actually be the largest standing stadium in Germany, period, because it will then have by a few hundred standing spaces more of them than the Westfalenstadion, which I'm very much looking forward to, if you couldn't notice. Yeah. And the famous anecdote that you probably alluded to was that in the previous sort of upgrade to the stadium or reconstruction, fans famously put a lot of work into it themselves. I think the figure is like 100,000 work hours that a lot of different people put in, sort of pouring concrete on the steps and all that stuff that is the stuff of legends, but of a legend that is actually true. It is one of the famous things that is mentioned always when you sort of try to explain what Union is about.
Yes, indeed. And I think there's also the Weihnachtssing that Union Berlin is quite famous for, when the fans gather on the pitch around Christmas and sing together for, I don't know, an hour or two. So
yeah, that is also something that other clubs have adopted.
Yes, I think Dortmund did that as well last.
Yeah, and Schalke did, which is a bit tacky, I think. Not Schalke, but doing that, but also, well, But another event that is very much in that vein of sort of things that happen at Union is the annual Drachenbootrennen or Drachenboot Fun Cup, which is actually happening this weekend because it's always on the first weekend of September, on the day after or before the game. And that is a lot of Unioners coming to Grünau, to the regatta place there in Berlin. And having a lot of fun going Drachenboot rowing, so dragon boat racing with a lot of incompetence and some remarkably competent people.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to more reports on that subject from you, Daniel. To give you a short break now, Matthias, over to you. Do you think that Lucien Favre will change his system from a 4-2-3-1 going into this game? And do you think that Julian Weigl will lose his spot in midfield in that move to Julian Brandt?
I don't necessarily have confidence that he's going to change from a 4-2-3-1, but I've been surprised before. I'm not sure because it's as far as Brandt over Weigl, I'd like to see Brandt start. Obviously, he was a difference maker, and Favre acknowledged as much. I guess it comes down to where he perceives the strengths and weaknesses of Union Berlin to be. Obviously, Weigl is very pressing resistant, but he's not super creative going forward as Brandt is. I wouldn't be shocked if either one of them starts. I think if Weigl starts, it's kind of let's see if this starts to unfold like against Köln. I think we'll see a change much sooner. And maybe Brandt initially is the super sub, kind of like Paco Alcácer was at one point, Götze was at one point last season. So I wouldn't be shocked to see the same starting 11, like we did against Köln, and then see how the game progresses from there. Because Weigl had a very good match in his in the first match day, and he had obviously not so good against Köln. So given Favre's more conservative nature when it comes to chopping and changing lineups, I wouldn't be shocked to see Weigl start and then see how things unfold and bring in Brandt as that difference maker sub off the bench, which he can be, which Weigl then isn't. I think if you would do it the other way around, it's only if you have a sizable lead and you think you can add some strength and stability.
Yeah, I think that's a correct analysis. Torgan Hazard will be out for several weeks with, I think, a bruised rib. I don't know if it's broken or not, but I think then it would be maybe months, not weeks. I don't know. Not a doctor, but he will definitely be out for that game. So will be Mathieu Moret, who just re-entered running training, I think today even or yesterday. I'm not entirely sure, but he probably will be joining team training next week and should be then fit after the international break. Lars, how do you think Dortmund will deal with the absence of Torgan Hazard? Do you think that maybe Brandt will immediately slot in on the left wing, or do you think that it's more something job for Guerrero or so?
Well, I would be shocked if Guerrero started, just because that would indicate to me that a transfer of his to PSG or wherever basically is off, because obviously the transfer deadline is Monday evening Germany, I think 6 p.m. still. So until it's like 7 p.m. on Monday evening, I'm not going to be convinced Guerrero is staying at Dortmund, just because Hans-Joachim Watzke has made it somewhat clear, and I think Zorc has also spoken on this, that, they don't really see Guerrero staying on an expiring contract, so they will either sell him in the next few days or he's going to sign an extension, I guess, even though, they can't really do anything about him staying if he doesn't want to sign an extension or leave. But, I think in order not to jeopardize a budding transfer, I guess Guerrero is not necessarily going to be an option from the start or even altogether in the game. So to me, the question would then come down to, and not really be one, would be Julian Brandt against Jakob Brun-Larsen. I mean, Brun Larsen has good experience against Union because he actually made his Dortmund starting 11 debut in the Cup in October of 2016 against Union,
and scored a lucky goal.
Yeah, he didn't score. I will maintain that he didn't score. He assisted the goal of I don't know, might be Parensen or someone.
Yeah, who obviously has a Dortmund past.
Yeah,
just to get that in there.
Yeah, I think Larsen. First of all, there were some reports that Brun Larsen might actually be loaned out over the next few days, which I can't really see because there shouldn't be much of a market for him, and they kind of can't allow wingers to leave by the tenfold. So yeah, I think it's going to be Brandt, or my and Konstantin, I think's long-standing theory on this podcast at least is that Brandt is going to see a majority of his playing time as the de facto left winger, but obviously he's going to move inside, as we've established on this very show.
A central left winger, yes.
Yeah, his qualities lie, in the half space or as the number 10. So he and Nico Schulz, that should be a good pair on the left. So I think that's the most likely way out against Union. But I would put like a small chance for a very much a surprise from Favre, which would be Brandt instead of Weigl in a 4-3-3 with Achraf Hakimi as the left winger. I think Favre has toyed with the idea of using Hakimi as an attacking player. His mindset is very much going forward, as we also saw against Cologne. I think he adds so much dynamism that he always is a candidate to start games, but I don't think at the start of the season you want to tamper too much with your back line. Also because they haven't been, 100% stable. So I think if Favre looks at this and goes, I want to include Brandt and Hakimi, how do I do that? I wouldn't be, super shocked if Brandt were to replace Weigl and Hakimi played in a more advanced role than usual, but I think with Favre, it's always smart to bet on the more obvious solution, and that would be to just bring in Brandt for Hazard and, maybe figure things out if things don't go Dortmund's way after 60 minutes again.
Yeah, that's correct. And I personally actually would prefer, if you put Hakimi on the left wing, I would prefer him over Brun Larsen on that position right now. Just because I think he can do way more damage than Brun Larsen right now. Just the dynamism alone.
He's also he's just a much better player. So I mean,
yes.
Why make it more complicated than it is?
Yeah, fair enough. Matthias, how do you see Dortmund setting up then finally?
I think obviously with Hazard not playing, I would venture to guess you would put a Brandt in that position and see that typical swapping of the front three that you see, that more fluid swapping of positions between Roy, Sancho, and Brandt. Other than that, I don't necessarily see any major changes to the lineup versus Köln or Augsburg in that sense. I think Piszczek will start on the right. I think Schulz will probably start on the left. And you have your difference makers on the bench that could come in a pinch if need be.
All right, fair enough. Yeah, I think I'll stick to that. Daniel, so now it's on you to walk us through a little bit about FC Union Berlin's style of play under their coach Urs Fischer. Wherever you want to start.
Well, there's only one place to start really, which is at the back, because
Schlotterbeck.
Yes, he won't obviously be there because he had a distinction of receiving Union's first ever red card in the Bundesliga, and is now barred for the next 2 games. But still, Union is a team that very much built their success in the second division on being defensively very solid. there wasn't much to say about their attacking style in a lot of the games, even the ones that they won last year, because it was basically not conceding a lot and then having either physical dominance, sometimes a bit of sort of technical quality that was too much for the second division, and a lot of nicely executed set pieces and sort of some counterattacks.
Already senses shivered on my spine when I hear nicely executed set pieces.
Yes, I was about to mention when you said that Dortmund is conceding about half of their chances and goals from set pieces, because that's the same for Union attacking wise. Pretty much exactly half of their expected goals against Augsburg, for example, came from set pieces. Obviously, the big issue will be how much Union will get into parts of the field where you can get set pieces and you can use to attack from.
Well, if Dortmund start like they did against Cologne, it's about 5 in the first 20 minutes. So,
yeah, and I'm really curious to see how attacking Union will approach this game, not just in the sense of how much they will invest in attack, but also how far forward they will try to defend against Dortmund, because in the last match, last year in the second round of the DFB Pokal, I was very much expecting Union to really approach it with a sort of a parking the bus mentality, but they didn't back then. They were quite a lot more adventurous than I would have expected them to be. So I'm really curious to see how that will be whether that will again be the case this week on Saturday. And I can't really imagine them trusting their backline to be quick enough to recover after they press high, but maybe they will surprise me. Pace is really very much the issue with the backline, even more so now with Schlotterbeck out, because that means that two of Subotic, Marvin Friedrich, Florian Hübner, and Mia Pahnsen probably will play, with the first three, the first two by far the more likely. And all of those central defenders have quite a lot of quality in sort of doing some last-ditch defending around the box, but neither of them are very quick, and that could be quite the problem against Dortmund's attack, I guess.
Yeah, from what I've seen from Subotic so far is that he's not in his very best form yet. Can you confirm that?
He can't be, really, because he did play quite pretty decent season last year with Saint-Etienne, but then he was injured for the last couple of months. So at first he was injured, then he didn't play much, and also only had a belated entry into the sort of summer preparation camp. So there's obviously, together with his age, which is actually not that advanced. I think he's 30 now, which isn't too old for a center back.
Thank you.
Yeah. But still, he looked a bit older than that in the first few times that he played for Union. So it wasn't just that he was a bit slow to recover at times, but he also had some pretty significant mistakes on the ball against Augsburg, and sort of avoiding those mistakes will be really key to Union's chances, small as they are, against Dortmund, because that was really what broke their necks against RB Leipzig in the first game, where they had a pretty decent defensive setup in the first 15 minutes or so, but then just gifted them turnovers in the final third, which is a stupid thing to do, especially against Leipzig. And because
won't
Subotic,
be much smarter against Dortmund, if I may interject.
Yeah,
so.
exactly. And because Subotic was a bit liable for some of those, I'm curious whether he will actually play. And was Fischer left Marvin Friedrich out against Augsburg, which is his former club, where he had a bit of a transfer saga. So you kind of saw that he wasn't much of a ausgerechnet so-and-so coach going there. So maybe we won't actually see Subotic play.
Yeah, we'll see. I've got one question: is what's up with Felix Groß? I kind of blindly picked him as one of my depth players for my fantasy team, but he didn't play last week, as far as I know. Why not?
No, he hasn't featured at all so far. And actually, it was a bit of a surprise when Union announced the extension of his contract for the season, because he wasn't even sort of a starter in many games last season. He kind of job shared with Robert Joule, who is, I think, now back at Hoffenheim, if they haven't found another team to take him off their hands. But Groß didn't really get to nail down that position in central midfield at any point last season. And there were some doubts about whether he would really be able to contribute at Bundesliga level, because he doesn't have too many really outstanding attributes. He's not particularly quick at Bundesliga level. He has decent technique, but not outstanding. He has alright anticipation and has had some good pressing performances, but also some sort of not so great ones. So it's really hard to sort of say what exactly Felix Groß can give you on that level. He's a really competent player in the second division, and can do a number of jobs for you there. But it wasn't quite obvious in what role Union could need and use him in the Bundesliga. But now that Christian Gentner had a knock last week and didn't also play too great against Leipzig, and Grisha Prömel, who was sort of the mainstay in Union's midfield over the last 1.5 years or so, 1 year. Now he's out injured for the game against Dortmund. There might be an opening for Groß to actually come back into number 8 role.
Well, good thing I asked. But
well, Stefan, if you play Groß, that basically means you don't want the candlelight dinner with me, so I'll take that as a personal insult.
Well, I don't think I've actually played him. I just benched him last, but
no, because you just said good you were asking. I mean, you were clearly thinking about starting Union Berlin midfielder against Dortmund. That doesn't strike me as a smart fantasy football move, Stefan.
Yeah, so what if I want a candlelight dinner with Konstantin Lars? Stop judging me. But back to a more serious note, before my geography gets tested, or something. What do you make of the striking duo Anthony Ucha and Markus Ingvartsen?
Ingvartsen has played more of a number 10 and pressing forward role. I think Ucha will be quite important for this Union side, because he has a speed of movement and of thought and of technique that really none of the other striking options for Union have to the same degree. It was visible that he needed to find some either unselfishness or understanding and sort of getting used to his fellow players in that Union side. There were a few moves he seemed a bit out of sync with them. So it's not unlikely that those two will again start, even though Sebastian Andersen and Sebastian Polter, the other two strikers, combined for the first goal last week, the first goal of Union's Bundesliga history. But Ucha is just a bit better in a few respects. And because Union will not create a huge amount of chances at all this season, and especially against Dortmund, they will rely on some clinical finishing. And the quality that Ucha has in a proven goal-scoring ability, which is a horrible phrase, which I always get annoyed by when people use it, so I'm not quite sure why I just did. But that's the feeling that you get from Ucha playing on that level and in that Union side, that is what he brings to the team. And so I think he will be a central figure, even though Sebastian Andersen and Sebastian Polter also made a good case for playing at least some minutes.
Yeah, all right. So before we go to predictions, how do you think Dortmund should play for them to best beat Union Berlin? How do you think they should press them high and all that, or what kind of style do you think Dortmund should apply for best results, so we can then compare it to the actual performance?
It's a bit tricky to talk about matchups, especially from a Dortmund perspective, against Union, because they're just lot better in basically any way, in every way. So executing whatever plan decently should be enough to win. Union's build-up play seemed quite shaky in the first few games, so pressing them high definitely would be an option. There would be a bit of a counter-attacking risk, but since Dortmund's defense should also have enough speed to sort of deal with that, and because Union, I think, would need a bit more time to sort of precisely execute those counterattacks from the back. Harassing them should be able to restrict their options well enough. But as I said, Dortmund is just a way better team than Union, so I don't think really it matters too much how exactly they play, and as long as Union doesn't have a really great game and Dortmund sort of misses some executions, I don't really think the chance of Dortmund slipping up is too high.
All right. Thank you very much for coming on, Daniel. You can now go first and give your prediction for the match, the final score, please.
I'd say Union winning 3-0. But that's just a joke that we have that. In our podcast blog community, we say that we just always tip Union to win 3-0, and if we don't get any points in our prediction games, well, that's just a pricey play for sort of trusting and loving the team.
All right, fair enough. Lars, do you also predict 3-0?
No, I don't. Well, first of all, I'm quite happy from a Dortmund perspective that Union got a point last week, and that it's not the first match at the Alte Försterei in the Bundesliga, because that kind of, I mean, obviously this is going to come across as an insult, but I remember Leipzig's first home game in the Bundesliga, which is obviously not the same thing, so don't punch me over the computer, please, Daniel. But the
was
vibes.
An important thing to say, because I was in danger of doing so.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but I'm just speaking on the vibe that the promoted side having the first home game under, I don't know about under floodlights, but in the evening as the top game. That was a bad vibe I got from that idea. So I think it helps Dortmund that, it's still going to be a great atmosphere, obviously, but, it's not going to be historic in any way, I don't think. So
no, the thing is that the Leipzig game doesn't really count. So
yeah, I guess
this kind of feels like the first time. I can assure you that there won't be sort of any lack in the intensity and ferocity of the atmosphere.
No,
I don't think there will be a noticeable difference between sort of the premiere and that game.
Well, I hope so.
Yeah, that would be also. You got my point. As for my prediction, I basically promised Ross Dunbar, who works as, I want to say, the social media manager, but please don't punch me, Ross. If that's incorrect. I basically promised him that Sebastian Polter was going to score one past Bürki, so I'm going with a 3-1 victory for Dortmund.
All right. Lars, I'm actually still a bit upset about you, because you actually suggested that the only way for me to have a candlelight dinner with you is to win this frickin' fantasy game, and I
there
would
is
never do that.
an ocean between us, Stefan. That is part of our geography, Chris.
Well, nevertheless, airplanes have been invented, and there might be a chance I am going to Dortmund or Bonn or whatever. So just
you wouldn't know the difference, would you?
No, I would. I'm pretty sure I would. I've not been in Bonn yet, but I've been there via train, just passing through. So yeah,
you've seen everything you needed to see,
basically. I think that can be said a lot about a lot of towns in Germany. I don't know if you can say that about Bonn, actually, because I hear it's very beautiful there, especially since you're living there. With all that being said, I will go for 3-0 win because I did not make any promises to Ross Dunbar. So there's that. Matthias, what are your prediction vibes?
I'm going to go 2-0.
All right. That sounds terrific. So, I think we can all knock it on the head now. Daniel, please tell our listeners how to find you on Twitter and your podcast /written work on Textilvergehen.
You can find me on Twitter at DA_Roßbach, spelled ROSSBACH. And you can find most of our podcasts at Textilvergehen and other blogs. We also do a history show on Union, which is called Und Niemals Vergessen, following a slogan that is quite prominent at Union. We sort of go through about 100 years history of football in Köpenick and Oberschöneweide and talk about that.
That's very nice. While we're on the subject of history, Matthias, how can people get in touch with you and read the piece that you wrote for the Yellow Wall?
Well, you can find me on Twitter at Matthias Hug, and of course on the website you can read the article about Manny Buxmüller, because of course he was honored during the Augsburg match, and get a little bit more information there on one of the oldest ever, or actually the oldest ever active NFL roster player in history.
Yes, Lars, who did they play for? Did he play for?
I want to say Seattle, but I'm not sure that the franchise actually existed back then.
Well, the Seahawks started in the late 70s, so at that point he was still playing for Dortmund, but actually he was playing in NFL Europe, so it's kind of an entrapment question there. He was playing for the Rhine Fire in the mid to late 90s.
Yeah, that's Düsseldorf. That doesn't count.
All right, so Lars, how can people get in touch with you?
If you're female, you can set up candlelight dinners with me without the fantasy game at Lars Pollmann.
All right, I'm sure you will get a big reaction to that. So you can get in touch with me. Please, no scheduling of candlelight dinners from any sex. So, just so you know, but you can find me at Stefan Butzko. If you want to get in touch with all of us, please do that at Yellowwallpod is our Twitter handle and our Facebook handle. If you want to subscribe to our show, attention, I have added to our feeds. Not only can you subscribe to our SoundCloud, iTunes, and Stitcher Radio now, but also you will find us on Google Play Music, and we now also have a YouTube channel. I can't name of that channel yet because we need 100 subscribers first to enter that, but please go there and subscribe so I can in the future name a URL to meet YouTube's pesky conditions there. Please do that, and if you subscribe via iTunes also please drop us a nice little rating. And of course, if you want to become a patron and read our written content, go to patreon.com/theyellowwall and subscribe for $1 or directly to theyellowwall.net, where you find everything you need to know about us. So, I would say until next week, as always, everyone out there, thank you for listening and goodbye.